All right. Before we recess, I just want to make a comment. I just want to make it real clear that there is to be no inappropriate comments or disruptive comments to be made inside of this courtroom. If anybody is found to make those, they will be immediately escorted out and barred for the balance of this. All right, I just want to make that real clear. And just in case you're wondering, there are microphones all around. And so if I get a report of that, there's going to be some serious issues and serious problems. So I just kind of wanted to put that out for everybody so it's crystal clear. There's going to be no warnings, no yellow cards. You're out. All right? So
did you ask her what they were?
Yeah.
And what was her response?
She described thoughts of hurting the kids or them having some sort of ailment. So like she was very worried that Cora had, whenever she had a stomach ache, she became overly worried that she was, had like a liver problem or something much more dramatic than it was.
Okay. But going back to that first part, she said she had thoughts of harming the kids. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And did she tell you whether or not she had specific thoughts of how she would harm the kids?
No.
And she didn't describe that as hearing this external voice telling her to harm the kids, correct?
Correct.
She told you she was having intrusive thoughts herself of harming the children, correct?
Correct.
And did you ask her how she was going to harm the kids?
I didn't ask it in that way. It was the same thing. I said, do you have a plan and is it disturbing to you? And she said no, and then she said yes. And
let me go back for a minute there. You said, do you have a plan? And she said no. What was the second part of the question?
I said, do you find it disturbing?
Okay.
And she said yes. And she described it as really the way she was describing it as something that might happen to the kids.
So it was more something might happen than she might do something. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And did she tell you how long she had those thoughts for?
She didn't give a duration.
And how many times did she tell you this, that she had thoughts of harming the kids?
A couple times.
And was that a couple times over the course of a night or two in December?
Yeah.
Okay. And as a result of her telling you this, that she had thoughts of harming the kids, what did you do?
Her parents came up, and I think I asked her at some point, do you feel like you need to be kept away from them? And she said no. And then, it was very confusing because a minute later she was making them lunch or playing with them or, getting them ready for bed or whatever.
Now I want to direct your attention to January 29th, 2023. Did you perform an autopsy on Callan Patrick Clancy?
I did.
And when you performed this autopsy, did you follow the procedure you just described where you did an external examination and then an internal examination?
Yes.
And can you tell us what your initial observations were of Callan when you started the external examination?
Yes. So Callan had some therapeutic procedures in place, or therapeutic equipment in place, including a thermometer in the left nostril, a nasogastric tube in the right, an endotracheal tube down the throat, a Foley catheter draining urine, intravascular catheters in the right hand and right wrist, and an intravascular catheter in the left foot. There was some adhesive residue, possibly from other therapeutic procedures as well, on his chest. And there are additional needle marks that I saw on his body. In general, should I keep going? Or?
Well, what were your general observations?
In general, he was, we measured him at 26 inches long and 24 pounds. He had general edema, and those are the general
So when you were talking about therapeutic things, are those things that were done by a medical provider at a hospital or some such setting?
Correct.
Okay. And what do you mean when you say he had general edema?
It means that he had his whole body had more fluid than one would expect in a person or an 8-month-old who had not been in the hospital. It's very common for someone coming from the hospital to have had been given fluids such that they have excess fluid and swelling.
Did you make observations of any injuries or trauma to Callan?
Yes.
Okay. If we could have photo 9960.
Hold on, let me just, members of the jury, I just want to give you, kind of revisit that instruction that I talked to you last week about. If you may remember, we talked about before they played that tape. All right? I just want to remind you that sometimes evidence is presented in the trial that creates emotional reactions. But as jurors who've taken an oath to follow the law, I'm instructing you, as I did last week, you must separate any emotional reaction on your part from the informational value and the weight from the evidence. You must not be influenced in any way by the unpleasant nature of the photographs and testimony that you're going to hear this morning or throughout the whole trial as well. So you must find the facts in this case based only on the evidence. But you can't find those facts or base those facts on sympathy, anger, passion, prejudice, or pity against either side. So I appreciate that. I just kind of wanted to remind you of that. And with that, come on.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And other than yourself or other law enforcement and medical staff, did anyone speak with her at the South Shore Hospital?
No.
And when she was transported to the hospital in Boston, did you go along with the transport?
Yes.
Do you remember how she was transported?
It was a med flight helicopter.
So you rode in the helicopter with her?
Yes.
And when you arrived at the Brigham in Boston, where did she go there?
She went to the emergency room.
Did you remain with her during that time period?
Correct.
And was there anyone else with you at the Brigham with her?
Officer Broderick.
And so the two of you what was your role?
Just to overwatch and stay with her.
At any point when you were with her at the Brigham, did she ever, was she ever awake or responsive?
No, not to my knowledge.
And how long were you at the Brigham with her?
About 15 to 16 hours.
Okay, so fair to say it was over the course of that night into the next morning?
Yes, ma'am.
Over the course of the night into the next morning, do you observe her medical status change?
There was some type of medical code during the nighttime. I'm not sure what it was.
Fair to say it was chaos. It was like bedlam in that room, wasn't it?
Yes, very busy.
And you don't remember any other police officers? How about internal police officers from Brigham and Women's Hospital? Do you recall them being there?
There may have been security, but I do not recall.
So is it your testimony that you do not recall any other police being in that room or outside the room when you were there?
Correct.
Now, at some point, police were detailed, if you know, to sit outside the room to guard the door. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what were you guarding against?
Objection.
Overall.
Anybody coming to visit?
Right, because nobody was allowed to visit, right?
Correct.
And then while you were there in the early morning hours, about 2:24 or something like that, there was, as you said to the jury, a code, right?
Yes.
And again, that kind of amped up the bedlam at that point, didn't it?
Yes, sir.
There were people running from all over, and you could hear on the microphone, code blue, with the room being identified, right?
Yes.
And that meant that she was dead or dying, right?
Yes.
And were you aware that she was on what's called a 1-to-1?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means patient usually can't be left alone, and also depending. You always have to have somebody outside the room to monitor the patient.
And is that because that patient has been identified as a potential suicide risk?
Yes.
Now, on that, the 24th into the early morning hours of the 25th, was there a particular event that you were witness to for this particular patient?
She coded.
What does that mean?
Means her blood pressure dropped for her. It meant her blood pressure dropped and it wasn't sustainable with life.
So what did you do when her blood pressure fell and she coded?
We started CPR, we did compressions.
And other than medical staff that were treating her that particular night, did you observe anybody else present?
She had 2 police officers outside the room.
Did she also tell you that she was worried about getting suicidal thoughts?
Yes.
So that would have come directly from her, correct?
Yes.
And what was that? What were the details of that conversation?
So it was one of the things that she was anxious about. It was a fear of one day having suicidal thoughts if she were to continue to feel poorly.
Did you ask her about audio hallucinations and visual hallucinations?
On the 21st, I did.
Okay. All right. So then there was an appointment the following day on October 21st?
Yes.
So why did she have an appointment that following day?
Because she was feeling pretty poorly after starting the Zoloft, so we were following her closely.
That first appointment where she was seeming depressed and having issues with Zoloft on October 20th, did you tell her to stop taking the medication at that point?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you discuss other options with her other than medication, like natural remedies?
Yes.
And what type of natural remedies did you discuss with Ms. Clancy?
So I mentioned things like fish oils, something called L-methylfolate or SEAM.
Is Patrick Clancy your son?
Yes.
When did you first meet Lindsay Clancy?
I don't know what the year was, but I believe I met her for the first time at my at the cottage in Hull. That was my parents' house, and I believe that's when I met her. I think he brought it down there.
Was that before or after she and Patrick had gotten engaged?
That was before.
And eventually they got engaged and got married, correct?
Correct.
And had 3 children, correct?
Correct.
So I want to direct your attention to the time frame after Callan was born in May of 2022. Did you have a chance to observe Lindsay interact with Callan?
Yes.
And what was Lindsay like with Callan?
She was very mothering.
And was she protective?
I would say yes, like any mother would be.
Do you recall describing her previously as very protective of him?
I would say that she was very protective of him.
Was she, in terms of how protective she was of Callan versus Dawson and Cora, was she more, less, or the same?
I would say she was more of the same when the babies were little, when the babies were young.
So is that something typical when she would have one of the children? She'd be very protective when they were first born?
Yes, I think that's like any other mother, though.
The 911 call came in at 6:09 p.m. A woman's voice, steady enough to give an address, not steady enough to explain what was happening inside it. By the time Duxbury police officer Stephen Hall reached the house on Summer Street, he found a woman lying in the backyard, semi-conscious, cuts across her wrists and neck, none of them bleeding. She had gone out through a second-story window. Inside the house behind her were 3 children. Cora was 5, Dawson was 3, Callan was 7 months old. None of them survived the night. The woman in the backyard was their mother. Her name is Lindsay Clancy, and the injuries from that fall would leave her paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of her life. She is also the one who called it in. Sit with that for a second, because the case doesn't make sense until you do. A mother is accused of killing her own 3 children, and in that same window of minutes, tried to end her own life escaping what had just happened. There is no version of this that isn't devastating. But there are two competing versions of why it happened, and for more than 2 years, both sides have been building toward the moment they'd finally say those versions out loud, in front of a jury, under oath. That moment is happening right now. Plymouth Superior Court, Judge William F. Sullivan presiding. The prosecution says Lindsay Clancy knew exactly what she was doing. The defense says she didn't know anything at all, that the woman who did this wasn't, in any real sense, present. Before we get into what's actually been said on the stand this week, you need to understand who Lindsay Clancy was before January 24th, 2023, because that answer might be the only thing this entire trial comes down to. If you're new here, this is the kind of case we stay on until it's resolved. Subscribe now, because we're tracking this one gavel to gavel. To understand how a night like that happens, you have to go back further than January. You have to go back to who Lindsay Clancy was before any of this. She was 32 years old, a labor and delivery nurse, the kind of person whose entire career was built around helping other families bring children into the world safely. Colleagues who worked alongside her would later describe her as caring, competent, someone parents trusted in the hardest and most vulnerable moments of their lives. She was married to Patrick Clancy, who worked in tech. Together, they were raising 3 children under the age of 5 in Duxbury, a quiet coastal town about 30 miles southeast of Boston. From the outside, this was a family doing everything right. A house, 2 working parents, 3 healthy kids, including a newborn. The kind of life that looks, from a distance, like it's holding together. But something had started to come apart underneath that surface, and both sides in this trial agree on that much, even though they agree on almost nothing else. In the months before January 2023, Lindsay had been hospitalized more than once for mental health crises. She had been placed on a rapidly growing list of psychiatric medications, prescribed across multiple providers in a compressed window of time, for insomnia, anxiety, depression. Court filings describe a woman who was unraveling, quietly, behind the routine of nap times and pediatrician visits, and a job she'd once been good at. Here is the detail this entire case will keep circling back to, chapter after chapter, witness after witness. Nobody disputes that Lindsay Clancy was suffering. What's disputed is what that suffering became on the night of January 24th. The prosecution says it became a decision. The defense says it became a collapse so total that decision-making, in any legal sense, wasn't happening at all. Everything from here forward is evidence one side is using to try to prove which of those it was. By the fall of 2022, Lindsay's insomnia had become severe enough that court records describe stretches where she went more than 48 hours without sleep. She was seeing multiple psychiatric providers during this period, and in roughly 4 months, she was prescribed a long list of medications: antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, a mood stabilizer, at least 1 antipsychotic. Prosecutors have pointed out she wasn't taking all of these at the same time, and that for some, she barely took any dose at all. The defense sees it differently. To them, the sheer volume of medications being introduced and adjusted in such a short window is itself the warning sign. Proof that providers were chasing a crisis, accelerating faster than they could treat it. In December, Lindsay was voluntarily admitted to a mental health facility. Patrick drove her there. That same day, by his own testimony, he took their son Dawson skiing. It's a detail that's drawn attention. 2 parents making very different choices on the same difficult day. But it's worth remembering neither of them was operating with the clarity of hindsight. This was, by every account, one of the most frightening stretches either of them had ever lived through. By January, Lindsay had been discharged. Patrick has testified he believed she was improving. The defense argues that improvement was surface level, that something underneath continued to deteriorate, invisible to the people who loved her most. On January 24th, Patrick left the house to run errands. Prosecutors say the trip lasted around 25 minutes. He came home to a house that would never be the same again. What happened in that window is the hardest part of this story to tell, and we're going to handle it exactly the way the court has, factually, without unnecessary detail, because these were 3 children, and they deserve that much. Prosecutors allege that while Patrick was out, Lindsay strangled all 3 of her children using exercise resistance bands. She then attempted to take her own life, first cutting her wrists and neck, then jumping from a second-story window. When Officer Stephen Hall arrived, Lindsay was found semi-conscious in the backyard. Despite the visible cuts, he testified none of them were actively bleeding, a detail the defense has used to argue that cold weather and snow may have affected blood flow, complicating the timeline of exactly what happened and when. She was treated by first responders, including Pembroke paramedic Robert Costanzo, for a possible opioid overdose while being transported. She went first to South Shore Hospital, and when it became clear her injuries were too severe, she was transferred to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where she would spend weeks recovering from injuries that left her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The prosecution's framing is blunt. Lindsay acted intentionally, rationally, and swiftly. 3 words carrying the entire weight of this case, because if a jury believes them, this is premeditated murder. If they don't, this is something the legal system has almost no good language for. A woman whose mind, in the eyes of the law, may not have been hers to control that night. That is the fight this trial has become. And if this is the first time you're hearing how thin the line can be between a mother in crisis and a mother the state calls a murderer, you're not alone. That's exactly why we're covering this one closely. Subscribe now, because we're staying on this story every step of the way. In the days that followed, the deaths of Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy became national news. Patrick, still processing the loss of all 3 of his children and the near loss of his wife, released a public statement asking for privacy, describing Lindsay as a wonderful mother who had been suffering a severe mental health crisis. He later set up a fund to help cover medical and legal costs, a decision that drew both sympathy and sharp criticism from the public, people struggling to reconcile compassion for Lindsay with grief for the children. Lindsay was formally charged while still recovering in the hospital. 3 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation. She was eventually moved to Duxbury Hospital, a state facility, where she has remained under court-ordered treatment throughout the proceedings, appearing at early hearings by video from her hospital bed, unable to sit in a courtroom the way most defendants can. Her attorney, Kevin Reddington, made his position clear from the earliest days. He has consistently described Lindsay as a troubled soul who was over-medicated and suffering from severe postpartum depression, and announced early on that the defense would pursue an insanity-based argument, that Lindsay was not criminally responsible because of the psychiatric state she was in that night. The trial, originally scheduled for December 2025, was delayed more than once. Disputes over her medical records, and a separate legal fight over interview materials tied to Patrick that we'll get into next. By the time testimony finally began, more than 2.5 years had passed since that January night. 2.5 years of a case sitting unresolved, 3 names waiting for a courtroom to finally ask what happened to them. When testimony opened, it began with Patrick Clancy, giving what's been described as an emotional account of his marriage, his family, and the months leading into that January night. His testimony carries enormous weight for both sides. For the prosecution, he's a witness to Lindsay's state of mind, someone who can speak to whether her behavior in the weeks prior showed planning or showed a woman coming apart. For the defense, his account of a mother struggling badly, medicated heavily, increasingly disconnected from herself, supports the very case they're building. One of the more consequential fights in this trial has nothing to do with what happened inside the house. Prosecutors have filed motions seeking access to notes and recordings from an interview Patrick gave to a reporter at The New Yorker after the killings. In it, prosecutors say, Patrick made statements about what Lindsay told him regarding the crime itself, statements that could matter enormously, whichever way they cut. The New Yorker has not taken a formal position on releasing the material, and as of the most recent hearings, that fight remained unresolved. As the trial has progressed, jurors have heard from the first responders who arrived that night, establishing the physical timeline and the condition Lindsay was found in. In a rare step, The jury was taken to visit the Clancy's former home on Summer Street, allowed to walk through the actual space with the judge's permission, so both sides could point to physical details relevant to their arguments. What makes this case different from most high-profile trials is that neither side disputes the basic tragedy. No one in that courtroom argues that Lindsay Clancy didn't cause her children's deaths. The entire trial lives inside one narrow, brutal question. Was this an act of intention, carried out by someone in control of her mind, or the outcome of a psychiatric collapse so complete that the woman who did it wasn't, in any meaningful legal sense, herself? That question will define not just this verdict, but how the public understands postpartum psychosis for years to come. It's worth stopping here to explain what postpartum psychosis actually is, because this trial has put a spotlight on a condition most people have never had to learn about until now. Postpartum depression, affecting roughly 1 in 7 new mothers, is relatively well known. Postpartum psychosis is far rarer, an estimated 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 births, but far more severe. It can involve delusions, hallucinations, a complete break from reality, sometimes without any of the obvious external signs people expect. Someone in the grip of it can still speak clearly, hold a conversation, appear largely normal to the people closest to them, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous, and so easy to miss until it's too late. Cases involving postpartum psychosis and violence toward children are exceptionally rare, but not unprecedented, and each time one reaches trial, it forces the same impossible legal and medical question back into public view. How do you measure criminal responsibility against an illness that can strip away someone's grip on reality without stripping away their ability to function in front of the people who love them? This case has already reignited a national conversation around perinatal and postpartum mood disorders, often called PMADs, and the gaps that can still exist in identifying and treating them in time, even for someone like Lindsay, who worked in healthcare herself and had access to multiple providers. If a system built to catch this can still miss it, that's not just a detail in a court case. That's something worth understanding regardless of how this trial ends. If you want the kind of coverage that actually explains why a case matters, not just what happened in it, that's what we're building here. Subscribe now, because we're staying on this one. As of the most recent proceedings, the trial is still in its early weeks. The prosecution continues calling witnesses, including first responders and medical personnel who treated Lindsay and the children. The defense has not yet begun presenting its own case in full, but its strategy has already been clear through cross-examination, challenging witnesses on what they did and didn't know about Lindsay's mental history, her medication load, and the broader psychiatric crisis unfolding around her in the months before January. The unresolved fight over Patrick's New Yorker interview materials remains a live issue that could still shape what evidence the jury ultimately hears. And the central legal question, whether Lindsay Clancy will be found criminally responsible or found not guilty by reason of insanity, remains entirely undecided. What we do know is this trial will not resolve quickly, and it will not resolve simply. Every witness, every piece of testimony is being weighed by both sides against the same argument: intention versus psychosis, control versus collapse. There is no version of the coming weeks that won't be difficult to watch, and no version worth looking away from. 3 children are dead. A mother who spent her career caring for other people's newborns is now on trial for the deaths of her own. A father is left to somehow keep living past a night that took almost everything from him. And a jury in Plymouth, Massachusetts, has been handed a question mental health professionals have spent decades struggling to answer with any certainty at all: where severe psychiatric illness ends and where responsibility begins. There are no easy answers here, and we're not going to pretend there are. What we can do is keep following this honestly, testimony by testimony, as this jury moves closer to a decision that will matter far beyond the walls of that one courtroom. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with us, subscribe now. We'll see you in the next one.